We've never had anybody on the telematics side. And it's something that, Eric and I were just talking before we hit the record button about how important that is to a pest control company.
We've seen a 95% reduction in basically rear end collisions and an 85% reduction in just collisions overall. You want to cut down on 50% of your distracted driving. Tell the office to stop calling the technicians.
I really love, predictive metrics, things that you can look at in numbers and information that you can see that helps you predict performance and safety and growth and progress. And I think a lot of PCOs understand some of the predictors when it comes to growth and finances and other things. But sometimes a little of the safety stuff is kind of fuzzy.
You're listening to the Bug Bucks Podcast, hosted by Alan Draper and Eric Bassett.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Bug Bucks Podcast. I'm Alan Draper. I've got my main man, Eric Bassett, with me. What's going on, Eric?
Hey, Alan. Not too much. Dude, coming to a close of the prep season. It's so wild, man. I feel like, I had so much time, and I'm looking at my watch, looking at my calendar, and the actual hot season is like right around the corner.
It comes so fast, but it also goes so fast.
I know.
It's like it's like May 1st, and then I snap my fingers and it's like September 15th, and I'm wondering what happened.
Yep, 100%. I'm excited for it. It's going to be good.
Awesome. This is going to be a great year in pest control. Great year. There's just a lot of great things happening for our industry. I'm really excited about our guest today, Eric. Before we get to him, make sure that if you're not a member of our Bug Bucks group on Facebook, make sure you go Facebook, search BUG BUX. It's only for PCOs. That's a nice thing. You don't really get spammed in there, but we have some really good conversations, answering questions and helping with some really tough issues that PCOs face. Bug Bucks is also, we're still rolling out some new features of our platform. I can't give away too much right now, but I've been hinting at it through videos that I've been posting in our Bug Bucks group. So make sure that you join that BUGBUX on Facebook. Today, our guest is Andrew de la Chapelle, and Andrew has worked in the telematics space for years, GPS and dash cams, and created driver scoring matrices, which are used today by many leading telematics companies. He is also a National Safety Council driver safety trained instructor, and he worked at WorkWave, which PestPack focused, and he was focused on routing mobile and GPS modules. So that was a little bit of a mouthful, but yeah, I mean, he has such great experience, and we're excited to have you. Thank you for joining us today, Andrew.
Alan, Eric, I'm looking forward to the conversation. So thank you for reaching out, and thank you for having me on today.
For sure. Tell us, I know you've been in the pest control industry for a while, and it's cool because we've never had anybody on the telematics side. And it's something that, Eric and I were just talking before we hit the record button about how important that is to a pest control company. Let's start with your first kind of gig into pest control. When and where was that?
So now I'm going to date myself, but back in the 90s, my wife and I actually started a company in the Chicagoland area, bootstrapped it. And we actually, we worked with, at the time, it was called Rent Kill Tropical Plants. We picked them up as a customer. They later changed the name to Initial Tropical Plants after 9/11, and then eventually it's now Ambius today. And that was a great customer of ours. And the president at the time, Jeff Mariola, introduced me to the president of Rent Kill Pest Control. And we started doing work for them, which led to also Initial Hygiene, and then eventually over to the UK with Rent Kill Initial. So that's how I got my start in the pest control business, was actually creating, printing, and distributing all the contracts, the CDs, the binders that people used to use in the day to show that they serviced an account. Now I'm really dating myself. All the envelopes they used to send invoices out, which, credit card processing wasn't really a thing in the softwares back then. But so that's how I got my start in the pastoral industry. And then we sold our company in 2007, at the end of 2006, beginning of 2007. Not really sure what we were going to do, where I was going to go next, but I was introduced to the telematics and GPS world and worked for a spinoff of Brunswick as a private equity company called Navman. And so that was my beginning of GPS and fleet. And our company we had several delivery vans for the Chicagoland area. So I had a fleet, so I understood the nuances and the risks and everything else that are associated with having drivers out on the road. So the GPS was just a natural transition for me. Loved every moment of it. And then that eventually led to working as an integrated partner with Pest or WorkWave for about 2 years and building out their GPS as an integrated partner, which eventually led to coming on full time. And during that time, we acquired 2 GPS companies, and we also acquired a route optimization software as well. So that's how I got into the whole pest control industry.
When you mentioned that you worked with PestPack, what did you do? Did you help PCOs get integrated with the telematics, with the fleet tracking and stuff, or what exactly did you do?
Yeah, so we, as an integrated partner, I was with another company. So we actually integrated did a revenue share program with PestPack. And then I was out in front of all the PestPack customers trying to sell the GPS and the integration into PestPack. And then it was about 2011, and my wife was involved in, after selling, GPS for a number of years, my wife was involved in she was a near fatal collision where she was run over by a distracted driver. She was stopped at a stoplight. The guy ran over at like 55 miles an hour. So that's when it kind of a light bulb went on in my head. And I said, there's got to be more to GPS than just dots on the map or reports of how long someone was at one stop or another. There's got to be something for driver behavior. And at that same time, some of the manufacturers like CalAmp and Danlaw and others were actually coming out with what's called an accelerometer that could actually record braking and hard cornering and acceleration events. And that's where I kind of took the ball and ran with it, most specifically with PestPack. So we built a whole driver behavior module and reporting that could actually pinpoint pretty much with precision whether a guy was going to have a rear end collision or how dangerous he was on the road. And I worked hand in hand with Aero Exterminators for 3 to 5 years on developing it even further to make sure that it was bulletproof, and it actually was. It was pretty cool.
I really love, predictive metrics, things that you can look at in numbers and information that you can see that helps you predict performance and safety and growth and progress. And I think a lot of PCOs understand some of the predictors when it comes to growth and finances and other things, but sometimes a little of the safety stuff is kind of fuzzy. They don't exactly know where to start, and even if they did, they're not sure how to track it and what platforms. And you've been doing this stuff for a long time, and you've seen some of the benefits. I wanted to pick your brain and see, when you first started kind of working with PestPack and you're talking to all these different customers about this type of process, what were some of the main selling points? What did you start with when you talked to some of these PCOs? And then what was kind of the hangups? What were they worried about? What kept them from jumping on right away early on?
I think, like driver behavior was so new back then that people weren't really sure what it could really measure. That's really what it comes down to, is measuring that performance of your driver, that behaviors. And is it true? Okay. and so not only that, but look, if you go back to 2011, 12, 14, whatever, the last 7 years ago, 8 years, 10 years ago, there was a handful of very good telematics or GPS companies out there. Fast forward to today, there's just way too many GPS companies out there. So it goes back to back then, they were like, well, now it's an expense instead of an investment. Today, it's like, I'm not going to pull the plug because I'm not really sure who to go with. Or they are referred, they ask, how small the pest control industry is. And it's a lot of referrals. Hey, who are you using, or what company did you go with, or why'd you pick them, or and so that weighs a lot on the decision these business owners have in making their choices. But the driver behavior, look, I go back to the dots on the map. I think that's old school. You really, for a safety perspective, and look at your insurance rates, what's going on, they're skyrocketing. And people are like, the insurance companies are greedy. No, they're not. They're actually losing money on auto. They make it on the GL. And you have a choice. You have a choice to literally adopt safety culture within your organization to minimize that risk. But it's amazing how many people do not take any really serious any seriousness of implementing safety within their organization and following through. And sometimes it comes down to, as silly as it sounds, they won't fire a driver or a technician because of the labor shortage or whatever excuse. He's my best technician. Well, that's fine. You don't have to fire the guy. What you want to do is give him training to understand the risk of being out on the road. And a pest control technician drives double the average of anybody else. So he's in one of the highest risk categories behind the wheel, driving around all day long. So there should be some type of formal training that's just not once a year when you get your insurance increase. It should be literally an ongoing monthly, whether it's a tech meeting on Monday mornings or a mandatory course through the National Safety Council or Smith School of Driving, whatever it is. It needs to be consistent. And that's really what it comes down to. And people will not invest in that. They'll invest in CEUs, they'll, training, but they won't invest in driver training, which it's crazy. And it boggles my mind. And I talked till I was blue in the face trying to push it, but sometimes you just can't lead them to water, but you can't get them to drink it,
Your comment about, the dangers of driving reminds me of my very first day of law school. My very first day, I was nervous, like I didn't know what to expect. And I went to my very first class, my very first morning of law school, my very first year. I went to torts. A lot of people think a tort is like a pastry. That's tart, people. That's tart. Tort is like a negligence claim, basically. It's basically a civil lawsuit is a tort. Okay. And our very first couple of minutes, our professor, she very smart. She ended up on the bench for a while after law school, after she was a professor. But she, within the first couple of minutes after introducing herself, we have our first case. And our very first case is about vicarious liability. And vicarious liability is basically when somebody's doing something within the scope of their employment, the employer can be held liable. And so we had this case, somebody was driving around a vehicle and got into an accident. And the issue was liability. And my professor, I'll never forget this. She asked a question. She says, "What is the most dangerous thing you'll ever do in your life?" And, everybody thought cliff jumping or skydiving or crossing the road or whatever, riding on a roller coaster. She's like, good answer, but wrong, good answer, but wrong, good answer, but wrong. The most dangerous thing that you will ever do in your life is drive a vehicle.
So true.
And so what did I do after law school? I started a company that depends on people driving vehicles all over road like all day long. And not only that, in most cases, they're relatively young individuals. And it took me a few years because I see what you're saying, Andrew. Like when people start companies, they're like, look, man, I'm not trying to win a fashion show. I'm trying to keep my head above water. I've got fixed costs that I can't control, and I'm trying to financially stay relevant and alive. But I got to the point where I was like, safety has to be a core attribute of any pest control company, and it is so important to proof that it is our number one core value, and one of our number one goals is to be the safest pest control company in the world. We talk about it a lot. Everybody talks about it. And it reminded me, I read this book about a guy that took over this steel plant. And I think one of the biggest hesitations, Andrew, is that people don't look at it, safety culture, as an investment. They look at it as a cost. And there was a guy that took over, and he's a big name. I can't remember his name. We'll have to put it in the show notes. He takes over this large steel company, and he came in and all he cared about was safety. And all the shareholders were losing their minds because they were talking about top and bottom line and, the growth of the company. And he was only focused on safety. And what happened? Blew everybody's minds, because when he focused on safety, he focused on taking care of people, making sure that they had the equipment that they needed, they had the tools they needed, they were properly trained. All of a sudden, the net profit started to rise. And I think when you have a culture of safety, especially with driving in the pest control industry, you are doing two things for yourself. You're taking care of your people. You're adding to this idea that, hey, you mean something to me. I don't want you to get hurt. And I do this thing when we have the occasional vehicle accident where I say, hey, what's the most important thing that you're going to do today? If I'm talking to a tech, and the tech will say, oh, customer service, or, upselling and all this, great answers. The most important thing that you do as a technician, if you're driving a company vehicle, the most important thing that you do is get home safely every single day. There's nothing more important than that. If that doesn't happen, then none of this matters to me. And with that culture, you are going to increase your sales and you're going to increase your profit.
Absolutely. 100%. I mean, think of the claims and the liability alone just can kill a bottom line. And you talk about tort and liability. A company is 100% liable for their driver, regardless of what policies they have in place, regardless of the technology they have in the vehicles. That employer, if it's a company owned, or even if an employee is driving their own vehicle on employment on the company's time, they're still 100% liable for the actions of that driver. And safety is everything. And it really comes down to, you're investing in safety. The real return is a major reduction in your accidents, auto loss runs, your insurance premium costs. You're not going to get the 38% increase. You may get a slight increase, like a 6% or whatever, which is more of a kind of inflationary increase, but it's not because of your auto loss runs.
It's kind of a crazy thing. And we give a lot of PCOs in our Facebook group that ask about ways to save money, and they'll ask for referrals for insurance companies. And they'll say, hey, I'm using so-and-so, but it's really expensive, and, we need to save money. And, insurance companies, they don't care if you're big or small. I mean, that they do, but they don't care about the culture of your company. They don't care about, how hard you're working or what you're doing to grow or how driven you are. It's all liabilities for them. It's all numbers. And for us, especially for our company, I mean, kind of like Allan said, a lot of our employees are young, right? They're 25 and under, and that's a liability for a pest control company. The more drivers you have means more drivers on the road, means more drive time. That's a liability. The places that you operate, those can be liabilities. High traffic areas are liabilities. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And for pest control companies, as you scale and as you grow, the liabilities kind of grow with you. and you have to have some way to offset those liabilities. And, PCOs are asking for ways to reduce insurance costs by switching companies. That's kind of their main idea. Like, how do I switch companies to save?
Yeah.
And, talking to you, it sounds so obvious. Hey, the lead measure here to saving money on insurance is reducing accidents. How do we reduce accidents? We have processes in place. We have trainings, right? We have core philosophies like Allan's talking about, keying in on safety,
Yeah.
right? And I wanted to get your input on what we can tell some of our PCO, members. What's the first thing that they can really do? Let's say that they don't have any kind of safety process procedure in place. Let's say they don't even have dash cams or GPS. If someone said, "Hey, how do I make a safer operation when it comes to guys who drive my fleet?" What would you tell them?
First is, assessing your drivers. Hopefully you're doing background checks, you're doing, DMVs and all this stuff. But, there's a lot of great information. If you Google it, a million things comes up. But who has a great, and I'm not trying to promote them, but the National Safety Council has so many free materials. And all you have to do is give them your email and you can download anything you want. And what's even better is they don't spam you. You don't get 18,000 emails every month from the NSC. But they have they have telephone or cell phone use policies. They have posters. They have an amazing wealth of material that companies can download and use. They have videos that you can, maybe a driver's involved in a speeding ticket. Well, you know what? There's a video for that. It's probably a 20-minute video. And what I used to say is just buy 100 tokens, but not for any one person. But, they have to come into the office, watch that video. So it's only using your tokens. So you're not having to buy them for each one of your employees. But those 20-minute videos, they're kind of boring, but it's a good investment, put it that way. It's a very inexpensive investment in your driver's safety, but there's just a lot of great information out there. A lot of your insurance companies will provide great training and resources as well. So I would go back to the insurance companies, but I'm going to share a word that I love most. And I will tell you, if this is the most on-the-job vehicle accidents, and this word is going to be translate right into it. The word is nomophobia. And that nomophobia is a fear of not having access to a working cell phone. Okay. And that is what is driving accidents and rear-end collisions and increases in insurance. It's companies' inability and unwillingness to really enforce a no cell phone use policy. If you can nip that in the butt immediately, so distracted driving related to 74% of all on-the-job vehicle accidents in basically last year. So if you can nip cell phone use immediately and eliminate it, you're 74% ahead of the game because you have eliminated that risk from the guys out in the street. And that's
how do we do that?
Well, there's a couple ways. One is, policies are hard to enforce if you don't have a way to measure it. Cameras, if you really look, everyone, there's Samsara, there's, GPS Insight, there's Navman. Everyone has cameras these days. And now they talk about AI, that it can detect when a guy's eyes are off the road. Look, I've sat in those simulator machines. They're not that powerful. They still have some issues. And it's a waste of money. I think cameras is just, you throw money out the window.
Really?
Because
I'm surprised that you're saying that.
It's an after effect. So the guy's involved in an accident. Now Morgan & Morgan picks up the phone and says, all right, we're going to subpoena you for that video, that video footage. Now they subpoena it. And if the guy is looking left and the accident came from the right, they're going to say, well, he was distracted. You're at fault. Even whether he was or not, they're automatically going to say he's at fault. On top of that, it's like, they'll ask for footage on that driver and any type of, disciplinary action you've taken for the last 12, 18, 2 years, whatever. If you've done nothing, it's now a liability, because the driver should not have been behind the wheel. So now that driver becomes an even greater liability to you as an organization, because you never took any action to thwart the behavior or change his or modify his driving behaviors while behind the wheel of a company vehicle. So it really comes down. I mean, I know it sounds anti-GPS, anti-telematics and cameras and all that, but if you, I mean, it's, I sold them. I've literally installed thousands of cameras, but at the end of the day, am I happy that I didn't? Well, I had a job to do, and I think there is great technologies, and companies can utilize that information if they do. But if they don't take advantage of videos and driver training, then they're just setting themselves up for further accidents and collisions and things like that. So you really don't see a lot of major corporations, and I'll use our industry for an example. You don't see aero exterminators with cameras in their vehicles. I mean, call them, find out why, because it's a bigger liability than actually putting the cameras in. And there's a lot of other major corporations that do not put cameras in their vehicles.
I think it's obviously really important to understand pros and cons of situations like dash cams, right? And whether or not you have front-facing dash cams, in-cabin facing dash cams, what the information is that those dash cams pick up, other policies you have to have with them. And I like what you said about the dash cams being kind of an afterthought. Like, they're only useful in the event of an accident. And at that point in time, it could be a liability. So you have to understand what you're getting into with those. One of the things that we did in this past 6 months, we used to use these NV200s, the vans. And I have a love-hate relationship with those because, one, they're cheap, and two, I resold them for a premium when they were worth a lot. So that worked out, which is great. But man, they are pop cans on wheels.
Oh, they just fold.
They do. They fold so bad, and they total as soon as somebody, barely dings them. But we bought some new vehicles, and I've been kind of quiet about this because I wasn't sure how they were going to work out, and I didn't want to really recommend a vehicle change until I knew. So far, they've been good. We ended up buying a bunch of RAV4s, Toyota RAV4s. And as pest control vehicles, I don't think anyone's done this before, so it was kind of a new thing. But what I really liked is that it had autonomous emergency braking. It had adaptive cruise control. It had lane departure warnings. It had backup cameras with cross traffic sensors. It had all these additional safety features stock. Like, we bought some stock versions of these. They're all-wheel drive. And they had so many safety features built in because they're consumer-based cars. And consumers like safety features. And I think that the commercial-based industry, when it comes to, automobiles, doesn't really focus on that. They rely on after-the-fact vendors to provide safety. And I feel like something that we need to look into as an organization or as an industry is really pushing for the types of vehicles that are conducive to safe driving.
Yeah, you hit it on the head, Eric. That's awesome. Yeah, you're right. The commercial vehicles don't have the safety functionality or features that some of the I'll say the consumer vehicles do, like the RAV4s.
That autonomous braking, that's a game changer, because most of our accidents, especially if we're talking about distracted driving, it's running into the back of other vehicles. I remember one point I was talking to David, and I was maybe yelling a little bit. Okay. And I was like, what are we going to do to get our techs to stop running into the backs of other vehicles? It's funny now. It wasn't funny then, man.
I'll share a story believing in the telematics. I mean, I do believe in telematics if you're utilizing it as an organization.
So you're saying, Andrew, like, hey, there's a time and place for it, but it's not to replace training, maintenance, like ongoing, review. Like, it's more of a Band-Aid than it is like, hey, getting at the root of a problem. You're saying, hey, there's a place for it, but it's not going to be the end all be all of your issues.
Correct. Driver training is first and foremost what needs to be done on that ongoing and regular basis. Yeah, absolutely. And minimizing cell phone use. I keep on referring back to that because after years in the telematics space, having installed thousands of GPS and cameras and things like that, and even writing or creating a driver behavior scoring matrix, it still didn't minimize or didn't really help. I mean, people were still involved in accidents. You're like, you're striving to help these companies understand driver safety and fleet safety and trying to avoid collisions and crashes and minimize their auto loss runs. And it was like pushing a boulder up a hill constantly. I mean, it was just ongoing. But when you get to the root of it, it's really driver training and then also cell phone use. And, if I look at that, that collision that my wife was involved in, she wasn't at fault. It was somebody that ran over her at 55 miles an hour at a stoplight. We subpoenaed and received his cell phone records, and we clearly know that he was on the cell phone. Okay. However, he had made a mistake, and this is something that all drivers should just keep their mouth shut and never open their mouth at an accident. But he let me know that he had a stroke 3 months prior. And when we took that into play, he never let his employer know, and therefore he shouldn't have been behind the wheel of that vehicle. So therefore, that was negligence on the employer's behalf. But again, it still came down to cell phone use, but we took it a step further. They also had the minimum amount of insurance, liability insurance on their behalf that they could have in the state of Illinois. So that didn't help us either with well over 200,000 hours of medical bills. So therefore we had to go after the uninsured. But long story short is it still came down to cell phone use. And knowing that GPS and cameras were not accomplishing what I wanted to see, back in 2019, if you look out on the road, I'm looking at everything, I'm like, there's got to be something better. And knowing that cell phones are the leading cause of distracted driving and related collisions, we did a bumper sticker, as silly as it sounds. It says, report cellphoneuse.com. And basically we have a number of insurance companies that actually pay for their insureds. But to see the results from that alone, we've seen a 95% reduction in basically rear end collisions and an 85% reduction in just collisions overall. So we know it works, but where I'm going with this, it's funny how many business owners do not want to put those decals on the back of their trucks, because they are the first ones that reach out to their drivers on a constant basis. Where are you at? What are you doing? Where are you going next? And the CSRs, even though they can look on a map because they have GPS, they still ask where Jimmy is out in the field. I'm like, you want to cut down on 50% of your distracted driving? Tell the office to stop calling the technicians.
Yes.
And look on the GPS map, and they can tell where he is.
Yes.
Only reach out if it's an emergency, but they still reach out to him. And business owners are the worst, because they're constantly, they micromanage and they want to know where every one of their technicians are. So think about it. If you're a technician, what are you going to do when you see the boss calls?
I think I like those stickers because, and I don't even think it would improve driving because, I mean, I bet it would help because people were actually calling in. But I think the bigger part of it is just the mentality of the tech/driver. It's like, dude, I have a sticker back there. Like just kind of, one of my favorite interview questions is when I say something like, hey, if I called your former employer and asked him XYZ, what would he or she tell me? And I'm not going to really do it. I'm just putting that thought. And I noticed that I get a lot more honest answers that way. And I think it's the same mentality of like, hey, I have that back there. I'm like, kind of looking around when I pull up next to a stoplight. But, that's a great point. And then the distracted driving that's caused by the office. We have really strict rules about when we can talk to our techs. And what's more is that we have systems that allow call ahead. So Rana actually has this call ahead feature where the tech can do the call ahead, and it can text, email, or actual phone call. They can schedule that before they leave their stop. So they'll see where the GPS says. If it's 15 minutes, there's a drop down. I'll be there in 15 minutes. We'll call the customer. So they're not having to call the customer. But I think you're absolutely right, Andrew. in the course of our business, we're causing some of this and we need to reevaluate.
100%.
Yeah, it's so crazy how we've got like conflicting results and philosophies. Every business owner, if you said, hey, do you prioritize driver safety? Do you prioritize limited cell phone use in the vehicles? They're going to say yes. But then if you say, okay, if you need to get a hold of somebody, what do you do? They're like, oh, I'll just call them. Do you expect them to answer? Oh, of course I expect them to answer, right? Even if they're in between houses. And they're
It's
like,
funny, they'll make somebody sign a non-cell phone use policy, right? And then they call, and the guy picks up. So will that policy hold up in court?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that was nice, another nod to the RAV4 and just newer vehicles in general. But Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, ways that technology allows us to be hands-free, right? Because I understand that technicians are going to see things, their route adjusts real time. We update things. But I don't need that guy with his hand on his phone scrolling. I need him to have none of that. And if something needs to pop up or a phone call or whatever, and he wants to answer that phone with Bluetooth on the wheel, I'm okay with that. But the priority of the phone call needs to come into question too. Like, hey, do we really need to make that phone call now? Or can I just say, hey, call me when you're stopped, send a quick message or whatever. So, I just feel like things need to align. And right now we've got safety ideas, but not necessarily safety executions.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, we're wrapping up here, guys, running short on time, but this is something that we need to talk about more. I think we need to talk about it more on this platform, Eric. I really do. Like, we have to talk about safety and, if the PCO wants a good idea of what the smartest people in the world, i.e. insurance companies, think about how dangerous a technician's job is, look at their workers' comp rates compared to CSRs. Look at it. It's night and day between the ladders and the driving and the walking around people's properties that they've never been to and slipping on decks and the weather and all these things. And I think we need to make a little movement in the pest control industry about safety, and we just need to talk about it more.
Yeah. Yep. We just did, I'm education chair for the Florida Pest Management Association, and we created Tech Days, which is like this hands-on training, true hands-on training. But one of the companies, we actually had like 4 or 5 companies that really have never been to a pest control conference, let alone trade show. But Warner Ladders actually came down and did hands-on ladder training and harness training. And I'm telling you, they had like the best reviews because we send the survey out to all the attendees to, rate the best to the worst and what you liked most and didn't like, or what was most beneficial, whatever. But that hands-on training from Warner was spectacular. And what I learned by working, because I've been working with Warner for over a year now, but if you go to their website, they have a whole bunch of online training videos and all that, but they'll actually, if you're large enough, they'll visit your location and do hands-on ladder training at your facility, which I thought that's amazing. No cost. So, and for companies that don't take advantage of that, I think they're nuts,
I think there's a lot of great resources out there, and we've got to share those. As we're wrapping up here, Andrew, where can people go if they have a question for you, they're trying to increase the safety of their company, or they have some other question? What's the best way to reach you?
They can either they can just send me an email at andrew.delachapelle@gmail.com, or they can fill out an inquiry form on reportcellphoneuse.com. And my phone number's on there as well. Just don't call the 800 number or the 877 number, because that goes to our call center. Or you can call my cell at area code 847-648-4580.
Awesome.
And awesome. If you haven't figured out from this podcast, but I'm all into safety. I'm all into training. And if someone has questions or needs assistance, wants them to review something or discuss something, I thrive on that. So don't feel like you're interfering with my day or interrupting me or being a pain. No, call me, email me, text me, whatever. I'm more than willing to help anybody out.
Sounds good. Well, hey, thanks for joining us today, Andrew. We look forward to having you back on so we can dive a little deeper into the safety issues that pest control companies face.
Allan, Eric, I appreciate being here today. Thank you so much. It's been a great conversation.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please show your support by subscribing and leaving us a 5-star rating. Thank you, and we'll catch you on next week's episode.